what we call the harvest moon. Because in Asian culture, the moon is associated with rebirth in the same way that in European culture and so-called Western culture, the sun is associated with rejuvenation and rebirth. There were myriad sun gods in Western culture. In Asian culture, it's the moon that is worshipped and given this ability. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about this, and then we're going to talk about, I also want to talk about what's going on astrologically and what's going on, how it relates to what's going on in the world. And I'm going to bring it into this idea of chaos, because we talked a bit about chaos theory, and I got a lot of feedback on that. So I want to talk about chaos because of the time that we are in. This particular point in time seems to feel for many people very chaotic. So we want to talk about that. But first, I want to tell you more about the moon worship and the Mid-Autumn Festival. So the Chinese believed in rejuvenation being associated with the moon and water. Moon and water. And this was connected to women's menstruation, monthly water, they call it. There's an ancient fable saying that the sun and moon are a couple and the stars are their children, and when the moon becomes pregnant, it becomes round or full, and then becomes crescent after giving birth to a child. So the moon, as it is in Western culture too, is connected to connected to the feminine principle. However, in Western culture, the sun is given much more power rather than the moon. Given the fact that, just looking at the fact that we go by the solar calendar and Asian countries go by the lunar calendar. I think it says an awful lot about the differences between Western and Eastern cultures. And I'll get into that more later, but just bottom lining it, Western cultures tend to be more masculine oriented, drivers, doers, and Asian cultures tend to be more feminine, receptive. And it's fascinating that this culture, the history, the mythology of this culture goes right in that direction. So the moon is worshipped during this time, and in some areas of China there are still customs in which men do not worship the moon and the women do not offer sacrifices to the kitchen gods. Offerings are made to a more well-known lunar deity, Chang'e, I guess is known as the moon goddess of immortality. And the myths associated with this moon goddess are part of the origin of the moon worship during this day. Wonderful story here. I'll see if I can get through it quickly because we've got a lot of other stuff to do. But here the story goes: in the ancient past, there was a hero named Hou who was excellent at archery, and his wife Shanji. One year, the 10 suns rose in the sky together, causing great disaster to people. Yi, shot down 9 of the suns and left only one to provide light. An immortal admired Yi and sent him the elixir of immortality. Yi did not want to leave Shanzhe and be immortal without her, so he let Shanzhe keep the elixir. But Peng Meng, one of his apprentices, knew this secret. So, on the 15th of August in the lunar calendar, when Yi went hunting, Peng Meng broke into Yi's house and forced Shanzhe to give the elixir to him. Shanzhe refused to do so. Instead, she swallowed it and flew into the sky. Since she loved very much her husband and hoped to live nearby, she chose the moon for her residence, and when Yi came back and learned what had happened, he felt so sad that he displayed the fruits and cakes that Shanzhe liked in the yard and gave sacrifices to his wife. People soon learned that about these activities, and since they also were sympathetic to Shanzhe, they participated in these sacrifices with Yi. So that's the beginning of the moon cakes and the celebration of the moon. It's fascinating stuff. So today it's still an occasion for outdoor reunions among friends and relatives. It's a kind of a celebration of harvest. There's a sort of Thanksgiving element to it as well. They eat mooncakes and watch the moon, a symbol of harmony and unity. During a year of a solar eclipse, it's typical for government offices, banks, and schools to close extra days in order to enjoy the extended celestial celebration an eclipse brings. Part of the customs are burning incense in reference to the deities, including Shanzhe, and dragon and lion dances, which are mainly practiced in southern China and Vietnam. And of course, lantern festivals are very popular in China and in Singapore, so they have lantern festivals during this period of time as well. So I would love to, and I've been looking around to see if there's any grocery store that actually makes mooncakes. This area where I live, there's quite a rather large Asian population around, so I'm thinking that there might be somewhere I could go and find mooncakes, because I'm really curious about them and eating them. So, so anyway, this time of year is in the lunar calendar, celebrating harvest. For our calendar, we were just beginning autumn, so we're not into mid-autumn. We're not ready yet for the harvest celebration. That will take place, of course, as it always does, towards the end of October and into November, when we begin celebrating with, actually Halloween is the kickoff of that, and then after that it's Halloween and then Thanksgiving. So it's very interesting this time of year, but I wanted to talk about the things that are going on in the world, and as it relates to the transformations we're going through. This is turning out to be a very difficult time for a lot of people. I hear it. I know listeners to this show and other people, just friends of mine and other people that I hear from. It's become a very difficult time on the world stage, but also personally for a lot of people, myself included. I mean, there's been this period of 2 years that has seemed very chaotic, to say the least. So I want to put this in terms of astrology, which is something that I talk about, I find very helpful, I think frames a lot of the things that are going on, both in my personal life and on a broader way. I understand many people, don't believe in astrology, but even so, even for those people, I use it as sort of a symbolic way of talking about cultural things that are going on in the world. So the most powerful player, I think, in this past 2-year period, which for me and many people has been this roller coaster ride of unpredictability, of illusion too, of things just not being what they present themselves as, or not being what they seem to be. And the planet Neptune, astrologically speaking, covers all of that area. I remember, this is going back to the beginning of 2016, which is where I sort of feel like this was the kicking off point. And I was speaking with a psychic who was doing a reading for me, and I can't remember the question I asked. It had to do with something going on in my personal life, something I was looking to do, or something I was wanting to have happen. It might have even been a relationship question, or a question about a job coming, or something along those lines. And I remember her clearly saying, because it sent chills right up my spine, don't get too focused on or tied into outcome here, because there's nothing written in stone here right now. Things are going to change drastically. Things are going to change in the world. And if you get too tied into one specific outcome, you're going to be disappointed. And boy, was she right. I mean, she made it very clear there were big changes coming. And we've seen that in the world stage. Think back to the beginning of 2016. And we can just talk about this in relation to the presidential election that was going on at the time. And the outcome of that being something that few people saw coming, the election of Donald Trump. And I talked about this back then because I had been doing on this show for, this goes back a couple of years now, but I had been doing a series on this show about the transition era, that we were in a transition era, that things were changing rapidly, that we were in an era where how we dealt with one another, the kinds of things that, kinds of problems that we had were about to change and transform dramatically. I think it started with, if you remember back that far, the sort of revolution that was going on in the Middle East, with the Arab Spring, and that being a harbinger of changes. But I also mentioned that change doesn't always go in a straight line trajectory. It curves and twists and changes. And so when we got into the 2016 primaries and going towards the election, many people, many of